Hi, hello, and welcome to my new YouTube channel called Mysticism in the Body. My name's Devraj. I'm creating this channel, basically because I wanted to create a new kind of hub where I could share some information, and insights, being quite old now, like 65 years old, and having been in the therapy scene and the kind of mystical scene for 25, 30 years or so. Those of you who are familiar with my main channel, on bioenergetics, on body-based therapy, which has been going about a decade and has been pretty successful, who followed me a little bit will know that I used to be involved in Kabbalah and stuff back in the late 90s, and then I just got massively into therapy and especially sort of heavy body-based therapy with the Osho schools and stuff like that, because that was what I needed to do. I'd come from a very traumatized background. And then a few years back, sometime around 2023, 2022, I started to get back into mysticism again. And since then, I've really been combining these two approaches slowly, little by little. And I just felt like now was a time to start a channel on this. And hopefully to make a bit of a hub for people who are interested in these two fields and who want to share about their own experiences and get some support, learn some different techniques, this kind of thing. Having been around the scene, so to speak, for many, many years now, it's like, I see there are these kind of, very tightly held scenes from the past, the Western mystery tradition, Rosicrucianism, the kind of more Masonic, esoteric line and this kind of thing, their fixed schools, the Golden Dawn, whatever, from the past, projecting themselves now into the future, into the new era that we're coming into. And keeping everything together like they were in the past, and holding practices firm like that. And that stuff's great. You've also got similar things going on in the therapy scene or in this kind of underground bodywork scene, people who really hold to a certain tradition, they maintain it and keep it going into the future. But for me, what really interests me is like this concept, I think, that we're moving into a new eon, that we're coming out of this 2000-year Piscean eon and going into this Aquarian eon, and it's going to be different. Things are going to be different. And, I think anybody who looks around the world, no matter where you live, I'm British, actually British Iranian, I live in Turkey, no matter where you live, you can see a lot of changes going on in the world. And I think one way to relate to that is to understand that the eon is shifting. And to me, one of the things this means is that a lot of the old traditions, whether they're social stuff that we do, family stuff that we do, work stuff that we do, or mystical stuff that we do, therapy stuff that we do, are going to change. They're going to change. There's space now for new insights to come along, for new ways also to give information about this stuff. I've never been one of these guys who really believed in old school selling. You won't often hear me saying, smash that like button or whatever. It's not my kind of thing. I don't really push people towards products and stuff or courses. And to be honest, for the last decade of doing online stuff, that's worked for me. I've made enough money off sidelines like the online courses I've made and the books I've written, not to need to really push and sell. And I like that. I like that, to just be able to create content, that I try to do my best to create the best content. And from that basis, people come together, they share their own stuff and they buy some of my stuff and I make enough money. I've always made enough money to have a pretty comfortable life, to be honest. But what I'm really trying to say here, I'm getting a little bit sidetracked, is that I think there is space now for more crossover. And one of the things I really saw, as being in body-based therapy, needing to do a lot of therapy initially, and then getting more into, being a therapist, getting feedback, I need to be a therapist. So starting to be a therapist and then developing my own style over the years and then getting back into the esoteric scene, is that there's a lot of potential crossover. It's clear, that in a sense, people are a bit underserved by the kind of way that we articulate in our own mindset these different things. You know, the esoteric scene, you know, it can be all about kind of magic, Harry Potter stuff. You want to change reality. You know, you want to get more money. You want to make the really cute guy or girl down the coffee shop fall hopelessly in love with you, this kind of thing. Or there's another side of the esoteric scene, you know, which is a bit deeper in my opinion, which is more to do with awakening, with who you are, with going on a deep inner journey, accessing inner space. And one of the things to do that is you need energy, and that energy is bound up in your body. So when I came to understand this, you know, I could see immediately the crossover with body-based therapy and with these kind of underground techniques from the Osho scene, from the American drug treatment scene back in the 50s and 60s, where they developed these really intense therapeutic practices outside of mainstream psychology, which would unbind a lot of the energy from the psyche, from the body. But if you can use the techniques to unbind energy, then you can direct that energy with your mind for inner journeying and this kind of thing. And this is my concept these days. This is my concept. You know, I've written a couple of books about exploring this topic. And I think like now, you know, I just wanted to start my channel and get going with that. So that essentially is the concept here. We're unbinding energy from the body using more breath work or bioenergetic techniques. And then we're also doing mental practices, you know, visualizations, working with symbol sets, using processes which kind of investigate our sense of selfhood and start to dissolve it a little bit, take away this hardened sense of self, and moving forwards into a kind of new eon. You know, I'm a big fan of decentralization also, but we're going into a phase of the Earth's history perhaps and human culture where power is a lot more decentralized, where you don't really need, you know, the society, the mystical culture that I came up from was all about gurus. You know, you had the guru, you found your guru and you did what the guru said, and hopefully at some point you kind of became enlightened, or you went, you know, you got some insight, that kind of thing. And, you know, what we've seen over the last few years is this a lot of gurus getting outed for all sorts of dodgy behaviors, exploiting their students or having sex with their students or whatever, or getting money out of them and this kind of thing. And it's kind of collapsed the guru scene a lot. And I think that's fundamentally healthy, but of course it does leave a gap for people who want to step up and they want some guidance and stuff like that. So we'll be looking at all of that in this, you know, people who want to go on a mystical journey but they don't want to invest in a guru, you know, and looking at ways that we can do this, you know, ways that this kind of journey and deep process work can be facilitated online. So that hopefully, I know it's a little bit scattered, but like hopefully gives you an idea of what this channel will be about. And I'm hoping to do a few interviews here and there with people as well. And I think what I want to just finish off with now is just a little bit of my kind of history, mystically, therapy, whatever, you know, just to give you a little bit of background about who I am, you know, and why I'm doing this stuff, what kind of credentials I have. You know, I don't have letters after my name. I came from a kind of more underground kind of school, and you know, there are disadvantages with that, but there are also advantages with that. And let's just go into that a little bit. You know, I was born right at the beginning of the 60s, and I was an adopted kid and all that. There's a long story about my life actually on YouTube. It's from about 3 or 4 years ago. You can find that on my other channel. But on a kind of important level, I think, you know, I just dropped out at the age of 21, lived on street level, was a punk, drifted into drug use and crime, drank a lot of alcohol, you know, this kind of thing, and had chronic low self-esteem, you know, and this really, you know, throughout my 20s, these themes really marked me. You know, I was living in central London, mostly in Camden and the West End, Soho, squatting, like I say, and just hanging out with dodgy characters and really being in this kind of physical underworld, you know. And then at this time, I didn't really like winter very much. I mean, I'm half Iranian and stuff. I didn't actually know that at the time. But I used to go away. If I had any money, I would go, a little bit of money, I would go to Morocco, you know, and hang out in Essaouira, Marrakesh, whatever, you know, during the winter to get a bit of winter sun. And when I had a little bit more money, I would go to Thailand. And sometime around, I think 1993, I went to Thailand, 1994, January, you know, and I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep for an entire month, you know. I was 33 years old. and I just really wanted to sleep, and something was just blocking me. And it had happened a year before in Morocco. I was in Rabat, and I just couldn't seem to sleep, and it went away after a while, but this time it was like a month and I couldn't sleep, and I was trying to take pills like Valium from the pharmacy and stuff like that, but I could only sleep like maximum half an hour a night. I started consuming a lot of alcohol to try and help me sleep, and that didn't work either. And at some point, I was in a more hippie-ish place, Koh Samui, and I bought some weed or some hash off some dodgy character who's hanging around and stuff. And I thought I'll smoke some of this and it'll help me sleep. And I rolled one joint of this weed. I was staying in this little hut, this little kind of $2 hut, $2 a night hut, which only had electricity for a few hours of the day, this super cheap hippie place by the beach, Shaweng Beach. And basically I took a hit off this joint and I lay down and thought, now I'm going to get some sleep. And, suddenly I kind of woke up and there was this sense of a fireball literally behind my eyes, coming towards my head, and it exploded in the middle of my head, and I felt like my whole body lit up. And, relating this experience as I have done occasionally over the years, I often think, well, people are just going to think that's something from the weed, but I don't think it was. I felt my body just absolutely drenched in sort of sexual energy all night long, and for the next couple of nights as well. And then after that, I suddenly started to sleep again. I just started to sleep, and it wasn't a problem. I was actually on the bus going back to Bangkok on this cheapo bus, overnight bus, and I just fell asleep and woke up in the Southern Bus Terminal or wherever and thought, my God, I was so happy I'd slept, And then I forgot all about it. I forgot all about this experience for about 5 years. And then 1998, 1999, I started to get interested in a drug called Ibogaine, it's kind of come back into fashion now, but it was a West African shamanic drug. And I got interested in it because a friend of mine basically had a major drug problem, and I was really trying to support them to get over it. And this drug was meant to stop you from taking drugs, basically. It would kind of reset your brain and stuff. And so, I travelled a bit actually to Slovenia and around Europe a bit trying to get this drug, and I bought some and managed to get some mail order off some guys and some Africans and stuff like that. A lot of it comes from the Cameroon and around that area. There's another country there it comes from, but just generally West Africa, Tabananthi Iboga or Ibogaine. And I also got this recipe for how to use this drug, that you could just like put it with some vodka and red wine, like a load of it, the root bark, and just leave it for like a week. And I thought, I'm going to do that as well. I'll try some myself. I was giving it to this close friend, and it was kind of helping him a little bit, but I also wanted to try it myself. And so I put it there, and then I can't remember exactly, but I was having some big love drama at the time where I massively fancied this woman and she totally didn't fancy me. And basically I really got that at some point, that she just wasn't interested, went into a massive depression. And I had this thing sitting on my fridge or something in my flat in the West End, and I just thought, who cares? I'm just going to drink this crap. It's supposed to be another couple of days of brewing, but I drank it all down. And I just went on this kind of 35-hour journey, lying in my bed on my own. You weren't even supposed to take this stuff on your own because it's a bit suspicious, a little bit dodgy. It can give you heart problems or liver problems and stuff like that. But I was in that state where I didn't care anymore, and I drank this stuff down. And at some point in the middle of this, I had some huge kind of, it's a very long trip, Iboga. It goes on for hours, like I'm saying. And you have these visionary states, and then you also have these processing states. And at some point, I kind of spent 5 hours kind of knowing I was literally, sounds funny to say it, immortal. Literally something in my consciousness receded to a point inside myself where I was quite aware that I wasn't really going to die, like just a watching kind of place inside. Very weird experience. But it completely changed my whole energy. I came out of this kind of massive low self-esteem trip. At the time, I was involved in some criminal activities in the West End of London, and that was my kind of job, so to speak. I wasn't a violent person. I wasn't a tough guy. There were tough guys working for the organisation, but I wasn't that type. But like anyway, it wasn't really going anywhere, and a lot of my friends were not doing so good anyway. Too much booze and drugs and all of this kind of thing. But it completely shifted my state, and I just thought I need to give up smoking, I need to give up drinking, and I need to get into meditation and therapy and stuff like that. So having this 5-hour experience just created some kind of shift in my energy, where I just, a little bit like that movie Limitless, not as exciting as that, but it gave me a new kind of awareness that I didn't have to be trapped in this kind of low self-esteem box inside myself. And I got into I started to go to some meditation class at the Theosophical Society, which is kind of near Baker Street in London. And there was this weekly meditation class that this old guy was doing, and not that old actually, 40s or 50s, and he was something to do actually with MI6 or something, but he was also some kind of hostage negotiator for the British government or secret service in Britain. But probably shouldn't say that, but anyway, this is 25 years ago. But anyway, he was leading these meditation things where what he'd kind of do is he'd read a passage of something like the Gospel of Ramakrishna or some kind of modern day Hindu text, and we'd all sit there and do a bit of meditation afterwards, ask him a few questions. It was a nice social thing. It's about 20 of us who would gather. It was a weekly drop-in, and then we'd go for a pizza afterwards and a beer or something like that in a Pizza Hut round the corner. And one day he was reading this account of someone who had a Kundalini awakening, some Indian sage, and they were explaining it, and it kind of went in one ear, out the other. And then we're sitting at the pizza place later, and suddenly it went in my mind, that happened to me. So I think looking back, that this experience happened to me in Thailand, 1994, and then it wasn't I was so blocked, really. The blocks were so huge that it wasn't until I took this African shamanic drug and then started to hear experiences about meditation, but suddenly I put the dots together and realized that I'd had an experience like this as well, and I felt pretty dumb about it all, really. But I was obviously so blocked, because I started reading about awakening and Kundalini, and it was like you have this experience and then you go and do all these amazing things, and I didn't at all. I had this experience and just went back to normal because I just had so much stuff, psychological stuff, and so much repressed energy and motion inside of me, basically. So, from that point, I started to drift out of crime, get away from that. There was also, I got arrested with a load of people as well, and that was like a double reinforcement, this is not the path you should be on any longer, young man. You need to, do something different. I started to get into therapy and go to therapy workshops and that kind of thing, and it was good, but I thought I need something. I was very motivated at the time. I really wanted to change. I thought I was nearly 40, I was about 38, this is 1999, 2000. I thought I need to make change. And this therapy group is nice. There's 10 of us with a bloke called Guy Gladstone, really, really good guy, who did some bioenergetics, some body work and some group therapy, that kind of thing. And I thought it was good, but I thought, I need something more kick-ass. And as can often happen when you really need something, and some universal force is lining up for you, I got a connection to the Osho people at the time. And there was a guy in Muswell Hill who was putting on dynamic meditation. I went to that, and it was really cheap. It didn't cost a fortune, which I liked. I've never liked these expensive, super expensive things. Even when I've had tons of money, I haven't liked them. And I just got into that. There was also a lot of women around the scene. The Osho scene had a lot of women around. It was very matriarchal, but it was also very sexual as well. Maybe in a future episode I'll explain the connection there. But that also attracted me because I hadn't had a girlfriend for a while, and I really thought I really want a girlfriend, And I started to get into that scene and go to groups. I ended up with a connection to the Osho University in Holland, a place that's still there, though I think it's changed a lot these days and softened up and that kind of thing. But that was very intense group therapy process. I signed up for one of their courses, and from there I kind of took off into therapy, really. About the same time, like I was saying, I was going to Baker Street to this Theosophical Society place and doing these meditations. There was also a Kabbalist group meeting there, a Western Kabbalist group, part of Builders of the Atom, or BOTA, basically. And I got into their work and started to do their course as well. And that also I found it very, very interesting. I stayed about 5 years with that, though slowly the therapy was taking me over, and eventually I dropped the Kabbalah stuff and just get into therapy and my own process and all of this kind of thing. But that also really stayed with me somewhere deep inside. I did about 5 years of their course. I found it very, very interesting, and it was creating, I was still taking a little bit of Ibogaine as well at times, or giving it to this friend and stuff like that. And I noticed that also would kind of open a download channel, even if I wasn't taking it myself. I was in a room with someone who was using it, or in the room next door, around I had a flat in King's Cross as well, and I was doing a little bit around there, sessions of Ibogaine, and I noticed that this channel would open up. I'd be getting you had to study the tarot keys, their special tarot keys that they had in this Bota school, the Builders of the Adytum, and I noticed this kind of channeling, like I was downloading something from some kind of, I don't know, extra dimensional site or something, and it was super weird, but super intriguing and exciting as well, exciting thing to happen. So this was all going on for me. At some point around 2002, aged about 41, I moved into an Osho community in Dorset, and then I progressively dropped the whole Kabbalah thing, ended up spending 17 years in the Osho community, learned how to become a therapist and ran a lot of workshops and that kind of thing. And then moved out about 2019, and then had to move out completely around COVID because they wanted to close the place down for the lockdown. And then started to move into, and then, sorry, I was traveling. I'd split up with my girlfriend about 2021. This is, I'm like 60 years old. Went to Ukraine, just like a kind of 25-year-old doing digital nomad stuff, and going to meetups and things like that. Went off to Mexico for a few months, as you do. Went to Georgia, which is a little country just east of Turkey, between Russia and Turkey, and was there for about 8 months and stuff like that. And then I kind of wanted to settle down a little bit more. I went to Lebanon. I spent a month in Beirut, and I was in Beirut. This is it was the earthquake happened at that time, which was February 2023. And basically there was just nothing to do. There was no meetups to go to. It was I just really had to spend a lot of time sitting in my Airbnb on my sort of 9th floor of this block, this kind of little building that I'd kind of rented, and I just got back into meditation. And I went to, there was one meetup I found where you had to actually go through an army checkpoint, and give them a password, go into this Sufi meditation thing, and I did another hour of meditation, or 45 minutes there. And again, it just felt like I was being pulled back into this meditative kind of path. I did that I finished my time in Beirut. I thought, the city's a bit of a mess. I loved it actually, and I do love Beirut, but it was a bit of a mess. I moved to Istanbul, and this was more stable. And I just got, and at some point, so either there or back to Georgia to kind of move my stuff back, I just started to find myself getting flooded by these old Rosicrucian images from my time in the Kabbalah school, Builders of the Adytum, back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I just thought, this is a message somewhere, that I've got to get back into this stuff. It was just pouring into my brain. Something again to reveal about myself is that I felt for a long time I was getting some level of kind of inner guidance, which to be honest I desperately needed, because I was hopelessly inadept at running my own life for many, many decades. But I noticed that, for example, when I was living in the Osho community, when I would really take stuff on that obviously needed doing, like moving up the ladder to help run the place, I seemed to get more inner guidance and energy somehow. I was doing something that perhaps on some level the universe or some mystical school wanted done, and you do that and you get some energy. And even running workshops in the group room, sometimes I had quite strong insights. Leave that guy alone, he's doing his thing, give him a little push. I remember distinctly going up to this guy and really thinking like, this guy's okay, and a little kind of voice, not really loud voice in my head, give him a bit of a push. And I said, come on man, you can really go for it, in this bioenergetic posture. And he came up to me later and said, my God, when you pushed me like that, I was so angry, but then the energy shot up in my body and I just really was shaking, and it was amazing. So I thought, it's useful, and I would get these little bits of guidance. And if you're interested in this stuff, something I can recommend is look for something really that you think needs to be done somewhere. And sometimes when you do that, you get some kind of energy and insight. It's not like, for me, a big kind of someone giving me instructions in my mind, and it doesn't happen when I'm walking around in the shops, but you get this kind of like a magnet pulling certain bits of situations into your life. Anyway, where was I going with all this? Well, really, I came back into esotericism at that point, like spring 2023, about 3 years ago, and and I was getting back into that scene and starting to understand how the body-based therapy scene that I'd come from, worked into it. That you are unbinding energy with these physical techniques, and the Kabbalistic way of unbinding energy was very slow. You're looking at lifetimes, maybe. It was very slow. And so to me, despite being quite old, quite progressive in my thinking, obviously this needs to come out a little bit more. That you can use these body-based therapy techniques and combine them with some Kabbalah practices or Buddhist meditation practices, and you've got a lot more energy that you can direct inside. We'll be looking at things that you can do like that later on in the channel, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of background here. So for 3 years, I've kind of been immersed in these two scenes and finding my way back into the esoteric scene and trying to find my place a little bit and that kind of thing. And I've kind of ummed and ahed about starting a little channel on the side or integrating into the existing channel. I like to stay in my own lane with the channel and stuff, so I didn't want to integrate too much and get it too. I tried that before some 5 years ago, and I thought it doesn't work. Let's just stay in my lane. And I also didn't want to start something and then kind of find I've lost energy for it and I'm kind of abandoning it. That also doesn't feel good. I like my sort of guy side, male side, where start something, you want to finish it. So, I've waited these 3 years, and then now I feel like it's time. I can commit to creating a few videos a month on this channel, and hopefully you find it interesting. Hopefully you find some useful things going on. I will look at starting a Telegram group for anyone who's interested in this stuff. I've actually already got one running, so I may rename that Mysticism in the Body and go like that. If you watched this far, I thank you very much for doing that. Do feel free to give me suggestions of any content you'd like to see. I'm not going to drift off too much or just try and pull things in. I want to have a central focus, but we're basically looking at mysticism, Kabbalah, maybe crossing into a little bit of Buddhism or Advaita Vedanta, where I've got a background as well, and self-inquiry. And we're also looking at body-based therapy, unbinding libidinal energy from the psyche, from the body, and using that. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you again soon. Mysticism in the Body. My name's Devraj.